was this trend a while back called your Bookshelfie, and you kind of took a picture with your bookshelf and explained about what it said about you. So I'm going to do a BookTube version of this. So this is my uncurated bookshelf. I have not edited or taken out anything from my bookshelf before making this video, and I'm going to go through, share a little bit about some of the books and try and analyse what it means about me, and perhaps share some of the things I've learned from these books so far. I'll start with this end. This is a notebook that I have not written in yet, but will be in the future. And we have my Kindle in desperate need of a new cover. And then we have one more notebook. This one I have been writing in. So the first book that we come across is an Elif Shafak book. Now, I mentioned her in my 25 top books that are historical fiction recommendations, and I didn't include this on it because I wanted to go for a more light-hearted book of hers. So I chose The 40 Rules of Love, which I also really enjoyed. This book, however, is really interesting because it is set in Cyprus. It's about kind of a doomed love story between two Cypriots who fall in love, but they're from opposite sides of the border. One of them is from Greek Cyprus and one of them is from the Turkish side of Cyprus. It's also set in London, and it has something very, very unusual about it, which is that some of the chapters are told from the point of view of a tree. I am going to make a whole video on unusual narrators, so subscribe if you're interested in books that have very unusual narrators, such as plants, like in this book. Definitely recommend this for historical fiction lovers or anyone interested in the Greek-Turkish conflict. Next book, this definitely says something about me. This is Reef Fishes of the Indo-Pacific. I highly doubt many of you have this on your bookshelf, but please let me know if you do. I am a really keen scuba diver, and this book is literally full of pictures of fishes and their names because I'm super into fish identification and finding out which fish I have seen on my scuba dives. And I'm quite dorky about it. So yeah, that book gets read a lot. It was actually a present from my mum for my birthday previously, so thanks, Mum. The next book is Hamnet. I have done a whole video on Hamnet. This book is set in 1500s and it's about the son of William Shakespeare, another historical fiction read. Took me a little while to get into it, but I definitely recommend if you're interested in the Tudors, life in the past in England, and anything related to Shakespeare. This book I have not read yet. This is called Six Figure Musician. I got this book for my partner, who is a music artist, to help to inspire him, and he has not read it yet. So watch this space. Let's see if he gets around to reading it. That I've learnt from that one. Just get books for myself in the future, I think. Right, next book I am actually kind of in the middle of, and I had to pause reading it. So this is Empire Land by Satnam Sagira. It is a very illuminating book about the British Empire, the past, and actually how it is affecting the world today. And it is, as you can imagine, quite difficult to read, so I actually took a little pause from it, but I'm absolutely going to come back to it because I think it's a really important read. John Simpson on the back has said Empire Land should be on the compulsory reading list of every secondary school in the country, and I suspect I will agree with him after I have fully read it. So yeah, that's on my 2025 TBR list. I think this says that I'm really interested in history, and I'm not going to shy away from the dark parts of history that my country were involved in, because I think that's really important to understanding Britain today, understanding multiculturalism, and understanding the world, because as we know, Britain had a huge empire, and that legacy continues today in impactful ways. The next book on my list definitely says something about me. It is called Why Don't Students Like School by Daniel T. Willingham. I am a teacher, and this was one of the books I read to try and help students engage with classroom. It's actually written by a cognitive scientist. Some of it's really helpful, like a lot of things about working memory and how much you can actually hold in your working memory. Not very much, compared with once things have passed into long-term memory. So there's loads of really interesting things that I learned in this book about the importance of building background knowledge, exposure to lots of different things for students so that they can then access that knowledge again when they're learning things. I think that was the main takeaway from this book. But if you were a teacher, or even if you just work with teenagers, I think this is really useful reading. Then we have All We Can Save. I actually mentioned this in my BookTube newbie tag, and I haven't got any further with it just yet, but I will actually make a whole playlist and videos on this book, perhaps on individual chapters in this book, because there's so much wisdom here. And also I'm going to do a whole series on climate crisis books that are hopefully maybe more inspiring climate crisis books than completely depressing, but let's wait and find out for that one. This book I actually got at a clothes swap, bit random, but it's some clothes swaps that I do. People bring books. So I got this book because I actually really loved the film. The film is Emily Blunt and Ewan McGregor, and it's called Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. It is literally about a Yemeni man who gets it in his head that he wants to have salmon in the Yemen, somewhere where they are not native to, and everyone tells him it's impossible. But he has so much money, he is determined that this is going to happen, and it's about the people who try to make this miracle happen of bringing salmon to the Yemen. It is a really interesting book in terms of the narration because it's told through emails and interviews, and it's just really cleverly done, which obviously doesn't come across in the film version, although I do recommend the film version. It's actually going to go on a playlist that I'm going to make in the future for unusual formats of books because it's done through emails, and there's a few books that I've got in my head that I could do a playlist on that, so definitely give me a subscribe if you're interested in that in the future. Now, The Wager by David Gran I mentioned in my unbelievable books that I couldn't believe stories that are true. It's a tale of shipwreck, mutiny and murder, like one of the first castaway survivor stories, beautifully researched by David Gran. And I recommend it if you want like an adventure story, but that is actually all true. It is not historical fiction. Next book on my list is The Lucky Ones by Rachel Cusk. This is a collection of short stories, and it did one of my favourite things, which is when short stories are all actually interconnected. Because I don't know about you, but I felt really disappointed when I'm reading a short story collection and I keep expecting characters to come back in or things to weave in, and they don't. And then I end up a bit disappointed. Anyway, this book did actually interweave things. It's all kind of little personal stories about families, couples, children of people who all live in the same street. So yeah, if you want something a little more, not necessarily light-hearted, but a little more unusual with short stories, then this could be a good book. What Alice Forgot by Leanne Moriarty. This book I really enjoyed. I'm going to make a whole series on this of like sweet, heartwarming reads. At the beginning of this book, Alice falls down, bangs her head, and forgets the last 10 years of her life, including her children and the fact that she got divorced from the love of her life. And it's all about, is she going to get her memory back, that she still has those feelings, how terrifying it is to wake up and find that you have children that you don't remember birthing. And it's just quite funny, but it's actually quite poignant and heartwarming as well. So I recommend that if you want something a little light-hearted. I think for me, there were some learning takeaways from this as well, like appreciate everything now because you never know what's going to happen. And I think that was a really sweet message that I got from this book. When the adults change, everything changes. This is by Paul Dix again, another thing that tells you that I am a teacher. And I honestly think this is really good reading for anyone who deals with teenagers, perhaps particularly where behaviour is an issue. It taught me some really good strategies for dealing with troublesome children. This is not something that I currently have in my school. However, I think at any point there can be issues with children, and a lot of that comes from trauma. And I think he really highlights that in this book about not labeling children as the naughty kids or that one's trouble, but actually seeing teenagers as human beings and teaching you strategies for how to deal with that, such as just always being a really warm person. One of the main tips was never reveal that you are shocked by things that people tell you. Like, the teenagers want that shock factor, and if you don't give it to them, then that can be a really powerful strategy. So recommend that for anyone dealing with teenagers. Isabel Allende. I mentioned House of the Spirits in my favourite historical fiction books, and this is a much more recent book by her, which I didn't realise when I picked it up. I actually picked it up because of the really beautiful cover. It is called The Wind Knows My Name. It is historical fiction, but also up until the current day. It's all about refugees. I've actually worked a lot with refugees throughout my life, and it's a cause that really is close to my heart. So I found this book really touching, poignant. There's some really interesting jumps around time. So we have refugees coming from the Holocaust during World War II. Then we actually come across refugees fleeing Central America and atrocities there. We have modern day issues of the separation on the US-Mexican border that happened to families in more recent years. So I think there's a lot of learning that can be taken from this book. It's a really good storyline that kind of runs through it, which keeps you engaged as a story, but it does have some quite upsetting content as well. I recommend it for anyone who wants to learn more about refugees and anyone who loves Isabel Allende. This book is a Zadie Smith book called Grand Union Stories. This was actually a birthday present. Thank you, Sharon. I have read some Zadie Smith before, particularly White Teeth, I remember, and I actually read it when I was quite young, and I don't think I appreciated her work and her writing as much as I would now. So I'm really excited to see this work. Again, it's a short story collection, and from the blurb, I think they all interweave and are connected. So I'm definitely excited to be reading that. The End of the Ocean by Maya Lund. This book is again a fictionalized story about what could happen in the future when the impending climate crisis gets worse. This is a really powerful story. I learned a lot from this book about what could happen in the future, and it's just absolutely terrifying. It talks about the desertification, as in when things are going to become a desert of Europe and there is not enough water around to sustain people, and there are climate refugees and everyone is fleeing anywhere that was previously warm to try and get to colder countries. And it's quite an upsetting book to read. It's set between two storylines. So there's a 2017 storyline and a 2041 storyline set in the future. I don't very often read books that are set in the future, and I really recommend this one. And I also think the cover's really beautiful as well. So I might have bought this one for the cover. I think I did. Maybe that says something about me. So this book is called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith. She is a clinical psychologist who came onto my radar during COVID. She was posting a lot on social media about psychology. She really breaks it down into what's happening in the brain and ways that we can better understand our own minds. And I'm going to link her below because I definitely think you should give her a follow. This is a collection of tools and strategies that we can all use to make us happier, to improve our lives, to deal with the difficulties that life throws at us. She called it Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, because some of the things are quite basic, but they're things that we don't do on a regular basis that we should all be doing for our mental well-being. I have read all of this book, but I was rereading parts of it. So I think this definitely tells you that I'm interested in non-fiction psychology, and I'm really fascinated by how the brain works. And I'm very into promoting mental well-being and the best ways that we can look after ourselves. So I think this says quite a bit about me, this book. The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura. This is by a young Japanese writer. I actually picked it up at a fundraiser that my friend was having when she was selling some of her books. She has a much more impressive collection than mine. Jess, I'm looking at you. And this is a really quirky storyline, is the only way I can describe it. I picked it up because I thought the cover was really beautiful again. It's about kind of a woman who gets an obsession with someone who sits on a bench and wears a purple skirt. And I think it's mainly because this person is quite lonely. It's just really weird and quirky, and I quite enjoyed it. I'd love to know what you thought if you've read A Woman in the Purple Skirt. This is, again, a little notebook. This one is all my dreams and goals for 2025. I tend to update these every year or every 6 months. This is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I really enjoyed this book. This was one where I was trying to go for a bit more of a light-hearted read after I'd read quite a lot of serious, emotional books. Surprise, surprise. And I just really enjoyed it. I think my sister recommended this to me, as well as a couple of other people. People might have heard of Taylor Jenkins Reid because she wrote Daisy Jones and the Six, which is also on my 2025 TBR list. I think this is fantastic because there are multiple twists in it. One really huge twist at the end I definitely didn't see coming, but I kept waiting for it and it didn't disappoint. It's a story of a young journalist who goes to interview a very famous Hollywood star who's a bit older, and she's starting to recount her life and her memoirs, and it kind of makes you rethink everything that people thought about this glamorous Hollywood star at the time. It is not totally light-hearted. I don't want to say too much and give anything away because this is a no spoiler BookTube channel, but just to know, yeah, there are some slightly more serious topics that it deals with. This is another book that I haven't read yet that's on my shelf, so I need to stop borrowing things from the library and get cracking with some of these. This is called Suite Française by Irène Nemirovsky. I haven't read this book yet because I know it's going to be really emotional. It is written by a woman who never got to see the success of her book because she was murdered in Auschwitz during the Holocaust in 1942. So I definitely want to read it, but I know I need to make sure I'm in a good headspace before I start. So again, I think this book says that I do like to read books that are quite serious and a little bit traumatic. At the end of my shelf, we have yet another notebook where I like to make a lot of notes and journal. I have 2 more fish books. This other one, there's one more reef fish one, and this one's really cool because some of you might have never heard of this animal, but this is called a nudibranch. Some people pronounce it nudibranch, which is a sea slug, and they sound really weird, but they are so colourful and brightly coloured, and they're one of the really cool things to spot when you are diving or snorkeling in the ocean. So yeah, that's for my nudibranch ID. My final book on my shelf is a huge coffee table style book called Cambridge. I've actually got the newest version of this as well, which was a present from my parents for Christmas. This is by a man named Martin Bond who lives in Cambridge, which is actually my hometown, so a little bit about me there. And he goes around Cambridge in the UK and takes a picture every day, and he has done so for years. And this is a beautiful collection of his photography from around Cambridge, which if you've never visited Cambridge in the UK and you get the opportunity to, I definitely recommend it because it has to be one of the most beautiful cities around. The architecture and the history there is just stunning. So let me know if you've ever been to Cambridge. I'd love to know that. Thank you guys for watching so far. I'd love to know about your bookshelf selfies. So if you've done anything similar to this, or you think some other books on my shelf tell you something about me that I've missed, then let me know. Would love to hear from you guys. Subscribe if you want more of my BookTube content.